we must go back to first principles, not only as it relates to various ideas, but also as it relates to what our governance system is going to be. And it has to start with God.
Welcome to the Father's Life Podcast. I'm Michael Pierce, your host, and it is an absolute joy for me to have a new friend, the Honourable Brian Peckford, former Premier of Newfoundland, Labrador, with me today. You were born in 1942, sir. That makes you 84 years young. But I tell you what, you in your conversation so far have been so engaging and so on top of your conversation. I just want to thank you for being with us. You graduated with your degree from Memorial University. You went to school at all your years in Newfoundland. And then at the ripe old age of 29, you were first elected as a member of the provincial parliament in Newfoundland, and then in 1979 you became the youngest premier of Newfoundland since it entered into Confederation. You have seen a lot. You have experienced a lot of life, and you have always had a voice to say, I think we can do better. I think there is more in life. And so on that basis and that basis alone, I thought, this is a man that I want to have a conversation with. But adding to that, your consummate faith, your returning of faith, and your growing faith, and your boldness with the faith community in these days, makes you, as a parliamentarian, an incredible witness for the kingdom of the gospel of the Lord Jesus. And so, Honourable Brian Peckford, it is a joy to have you with us today.
It's a real pleasure to be here and to talk to you and to engage in issues and ideas that are consistent with Christianity.
Well, and you and I might even have some thoughts that not everybody will embrace immediately. But even as we spoke the other day, it's okay that we have discourse that doesn't end in agreement, but can we become friends even in disagreement? And I believe that for me, one of the areas of political life that we need to actually start restoring is the ability to have debate and have difference and still work together and recognize that even the person on the other side of the aisle at times has a better idea than I do. And if I can recognize that, then I am actually working for the betterment of humanity in our nation.
Absolutely, absolutely. The whole issue of dialogue and being able to converse on various issues, some of which, like you say, we might totally agree with, others we may not, is very important for us to forge a new idea or a new partnership with one another, or to advance the cause of Jesus and advance the cause of democracy. And so that's what I'm about. And I've always been a strong advocate of freedom and of democracy, and very often have had to challenge people, both in my school when I was in high school, as well as when I was in university. So I'm not new to the issue of challenging people, especially when it comes to fairness, democracy, and Jesus Christ.
Well, I think those are things that though maybe not everyone will agree, I think those are things that walk hand in hand for a better culture, for a better way of life, and for a faith that will actually build a better life in our culture. So one of the things that I loved hearing about was that you are the last living signatory of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And you were a part of that, representing Newfoundland, Labrador. And because you are the last living voice, you are able to bring back to the future I think there was a movie called Back to the Future a few decades ago. But you can bring back to the living memory of people who were not alive the reasons that we had the discourse, and the reasons that there was a strong component of our charter that was actually about the provinces taking their rightful place and their responsible place within the confederation of this great nation of Canada.
No question about it, and very often that gets lost. That people that forget. When media giants come together, when other corporate giants come together, when this comes together and that comes together, which is more material and physical and monetary, they forget that being part of a country, being part of people, means that you're bringing together ideas and people of different cultures and of different regions, different demographic, different geography, and so on, different culture. And so therefore, to forge political union is a far more dicey piece of work than when people try to compare unifying or doing something on the other side or on the material side is the same as trying to do it on the political side. And so, yes, the whole issue of 1982 and the Constitution, of which the Charter of Rights and Freedoms was an important part, was an effort to reignite our federation. Unlike Britain and unlike Japan, for example, and unlike a lot of places in the world, unlike France, Canada is a federation. Canada is a federation like Germany. Canada is a federation like Australia. Canada is a federation like the United States. These are federations. These are various regions of a landmass coming together to form a country, but in a manner which allows for flexibility in the management and power structure of that new country, so that you have provinces or you have states as well as a central government. And the key feature of federal systems is that there's a sharing of powers between the central government and the various regions, states, or provinces. And that's a significant feature. And when one talks about Canada, one must, and 1982 and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, one must remember that's what we were doing in 1982. We're doing two things, really. We were, or you can almost make it three things, but we were trying to, first of all, ensure that the Federation continued, and therefore a lot of resource powers in that old Constitution of 1867, which is still operative too in many areas, which talked about provinces, that it continued beyond 1982 and was a part of the 1982 thing. The other part about it was, of course, from 1867 until 1982, Canada was not completely independent because it still had to go back to London in order to get changes to its constitution. And so one of the key features of 82 was to try to agree on an amending formula so that we could amend our own constitution in Canada. We would not have to go back to the mother country for that anymore. We had been trying since 1927, 10 times. Canada tried to do that, but every time it did not succeed. There was no agreement between the provinces and the federal government. And so, the whole issue of the Constitution in 1982 and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and of course the third thing was the whole question of enshrining in the Constitution the individual rights and freedoms of Canadians rather than rely upon common law and precedents. That was the whole idea. And because the United States had a Bill of Rights or a Charter of Rights, there was a great pressure on Canada, being part of the same continent, to have an enshrined charter. People forget that. They forget that somehow, what happened before 82 was a hodgepodge of, people think it was still important, and it was important, but you had to go and seek out common law areas that were familiar or similar to your situation in order for you to argue for your individual rights and freedoms. Through the
The,
Charter of Rights and Freedoms, we were able to enshrine in law, in words, so that people could refer to actual specific words in a constitution when defending or advancing their rights.
these are very important things. As believers, we have a written document. It's called the Holy Bible. And it is the framework of everything that we are, and it doesn't eliminate the bad days or the misstep days. It doesn't cancel those. In fact, those end up being something that actually gives us hope moving forward. And so the idea of the Constitution being a failure 9 or 10 times before we actually developed one that was agreeable just tells you that there was a listening process, and perhaps an unworkable process, but maybe during that time there was actually a growing of recognition. Okay, your needs as a region of the nation are different than other regions, and we need to take that into account. And you end up having actually a discourse, and you can actually start to appreciate the differences of who we are. Even as the Apostle Paul said, the church is the body, and not everyone is an eye, not everyone is an arm. This is how we are as a federation of provinces in a nation that our very founding fathers said. Tilley from New Brunswick said in his morning devotion, he said, I opened the Psalm to Psalm 72, verse 8, and it jumped out at me, and it said, he, speaking of God, shall have dominion from sea to sea. And now you have this framework for what we consider the Dominion of Canada today. And I think the other side of it is that for you're saying that many times people forget. I want to suggest to you that many who are watching didn't forget. They never knew what took place from 1927. I didn't know that. I am a little bit younger than you, but I remember. I remember Centennial in 1967. I remember, the FLQ crisis. I remember when the Charter of Rights and Freedoms was adopted by our nation. These are historic things, and now we have to allow, if there's to be change, then those changes need to be predicated on agreement in the same way that we established what we have today.
Yes, and out of that 1982 and that charter and the amending formula, there is now a procedure through which Canada can change, and it involves two different formulas. One is 7 provinces out of the 10, and the federal government and their parliaments agreeing, and another formula is unanimity on the basic things that make Canada, like, for example, the parliament or the monarchy or whatever. These things are unanimity, and take all the provinces in the federal government and their parliaments. And so there are two track formulas that are part of the amending formula. But now there is an opportunity for Canada, for the first time since 1982, to amend our Constitution through these procedures. Now, what has happened since 1982, unfortunately, is that it's like the child who's always seeking something for Christmas or for their birthday. And finally, they end up getting it. Absolutely surprised that they have it, and now they don't know how to use it. And this is what's happening in Canada right now. We have an amending formula. We don't have to go whining about our inability to manage ourselves all the way to changing our Constitution. We have that. But since 1982, we have failed to use the procedures that are available to make the changes over time that the majority of the provinces and the federal government agreed to. And that's a real sad thing for me as being the last living first minister who signed that patriation agreement and signed that, in other words, that constitutional thing of 1982, that out of all that struggle and since 1927, and finally getting this in 1982, we have not been able to use it to our advantage to advance our country where there are problems as we know them today, both in Quebec and in Western Canada and in all the provinces. They all each have their own particular things. And so we need to sort of rededicate ourselves to the spirit of 1982. We're able to get a amending formula for the first time. We're able to get a Charter of Rights and Freedoms for the first time. Well, you would think now, based upon that, that experience would have led us to become more adaptable to using the formulas that were created out of that than has been the case. And that's one of the things in Canada that needs a lot of work.
You know, as you and I have spoken now a few times, one of the regional things is a current political hot potato, and that is the Churchill Falls electric hydro deal that Newfoundland, your home province, has been working through, and literally I am going to be going in the next week or so to be with Quebec leaders and Newfoundland leaders, Christian leaders who have a desire that where there has been this stain, where there has been this grievance, that repentance would take place between them, so that there is a commonality and an understanding. When people don't know what they don't know, they can't take responsibility. And so as believers, I think it's very important. And I got a feeling that this is a lead in for your next point, you don't know what it is yet, but it is a lead in. I think that there is a way that Christians need to take responsible action, but do it in a way that reflects the kingdom value of Jesus Christ, so that we are actually engaging in our culture, but doing it not just for our own benefit, but for the benefit of all in the nation.
I believe that what you just said, if that was more a part of the culture of Canada over the last 15 or 20 years, we would be a far better country as a result. And that I do believe that the religious community, and in particular the Christian community, especially the Judeo-Christian community, could play a really big role here in helping to solve some of these very intractable problems, like the Churchill Falls deal that was signed back in the 60s, which allows Newfoundland to get hardly anything for its power, and Quebec to reap, unbelievable, unreasonable profits from the water that is in Labrador and not in Quebec. But because of the land demography situation, there was no other way to move the electricity. But through Quebec, there is now another way underwater that is becoming more economic. But nevertheless, that power, that project, and that contract exists and has prevented Newfoundland from really advancing. For example, many studies have been done that Newfoundland, if it was just getting a reasonable, not even anywhere exceeding price, of getting a better share of that profit, it would be over $500 million a year. And some studies had it at $600 and $700 million a year. In other words, the water being sold in Newfoundland today out of Labrador to Quebec is, less than $2 a barrel of oil equivalent. And we know what the price of oil is and has been for a long, long time. So if you just do a reasonable price for oil at even $50 a barrel, we would be getting almost 50 times more than we're getting now. So I'm glad to hear about the Christian groups coming together, because I think it's very important for them to participate. And even more so now, Michael, as a result of, as many of your listeners and viewers may know, in Canada, and perhaps some internationally too, because of 1982, we created in the Charter for the first time, it wasn't in the 1867 Constitution, the notion of the supremacy of God, whereas Canada is founded on the principles that recognize the supremacy of God and the rule of law. That's how our Constitution of 82 opens. And so that we are within the Christian, Judeo-Christian framework in talking about our country.
Correct.
And so that therefore, how appropriate is it then that various Christian leaders get together to discuss in a civilized way and in a Christian way the situation that exists that seems so unfair to anybody looking at it from outside.
And we have these opportunities scattered across the land, and I would say that as a young boy, I was born in Ontario, but I was raised in Manitoba and Saskatchewan. Something similar to our background. I was raised in the United Church, as you were. And my father was a pastor in the United Church. And I remember very distinctly, by the time I was in middle school, my grades 7, 8, 9, and then up into high school, I remember we would go back to Ontario to visit the family, and all we heard was that, the West, all they do is complain, complain, complain. And I remember saying to the folks in Ontario, those are really nice people you're talking about. You should get to know them. And here I am in grade 7 or 8, and I'm challenging my elders in the family. And so then my last year of high school, we returned to Ontario, where my wife and I lived for 40 years of our married life. And all I started to hear about was all the West ever does is complain, complain, complain. And I realized early on in the advent of Christ for Your City that there was something in my heart as a young boy that God set there. Can I be a reconciler for people to where there is disagreement, but there's no response, there's no reality attached to it. It is only what they have heard through hearsay or through media, and some might say hearsay is media, but we're not going there today. But could it be that if I actually knew Brian, as not just as the Right Honourable, not just as the last signing member of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, but as a man who has a life of distinction and a life of commitment, that I could actually start to like a man, even if I didn't agree with everything he says politically. This is where I believe having people like you. I've had Stockwell Day on also. Both of you, before you became politicians, both of you were school teachers. I found that interesting. And one of you is from the East and one of you is from the West. And you both have at the center core of your fiber faith in the Judeo-Christian faith as a fabric part of the Canadian culture. That is not to say that we don't embrace other faiths, but the very nature of our Constitution, which was brought in and signed by the first ministers of Canada and our Prime Minister, the father of Justin Trudeau, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, was the signatory that said Whereas, and because God is a part of this nation, we will uphold the law of rule. I find it amazing. Speak to us. Speak to the generation. You met Vaughn and you met Catherine before. Speak to the younger generation. Not about, oh, we're so bad, but how do we as believers today renew a right place for faith in the marketplace of a secular culture?
Okay. Say, you referenced Stockwell Day. I remember Stockwell Day very well. As a matter of fact, he was an MP when I was premier, and
Okay.
he invited me to be a guest speaker at one of his constituency campaign organizations years ago. So I flew out from Newfoundland to British Columbia at the time. I think it was the
Yes.
Richmond area, and spoke at one of his events. So I'm familiar with Stockwell. And I didn't realize that he was a teacher as well, like me. And on that point, before I get on to your main question, uh,
Okay.
the issue of not knowing, and therefore, how can you therefore bridge a problem
Mm-hmm.
or solve a problem
Mm-hmm.
or deal with other people who have other ideas if you are not starting with a foundation of fact,
Mm-hmm.
of information. What's happened in Canada, it seems to me, is that one of the primary reasons for this, besides the geography of the country, we have not tried to address that geography well enough. We have through our political uh, uh, thing, because we've got provincial governments and the federal government, and we've got the Constitution, and we've got the Charter of Rights and Freedoms now. But one of the areas where we failed under that Constitution, where we're supposed to succeed, is in providing a basic education to the people of this country. And where we've really fallen down since my time as a teacher and my time as a student is that there's no civics in most of the classrooms of Canada, so that they don't learn about their own country. In my day, we learned about our own country, and we also learned about other countries. We had geography and we had history separately. Now they're fused together into what I don't know what you would call it. They call it social studies, they call it this, they call it that. But in that, you lose something in doing that. You lose something in doing that. And so it seems to me, I mean, I know more about geography in Canada than any of the students that I meet today. Way more. And when I got out of politics and I got involved in a number of businesses, I remember having to interview students with a master's degree, and they didn't know the geography of Canada. They didn't know the geography of Canada. So one of the problems in talking to your young friends there, is that there's an obligation on behalf of the leadership of this country, both political and spiritual, to address this issue and bring to bear the proper, reasonable proposals
Yes.
to confront this issue that we have. Okay, that
And,
we necessarily have.
I'm going to jump in because I don't want to miss this point. You said your young friends. I invite you, sir, to be also their friend, because
Yes.
you have a voice, you have experience that can be the greatest asset of young people today. And so we'll speak of them as our young friends.
No problem.
And we'll go forward from there.
No problem. Absolutely. And I'm pleased to be so. In the larger question of our nation and addressing our history and where we are today, number one, it is this whole question of information, right? And we need to have more information. I remember years ago, when I was both in high school and in university, asking the teachers in the classroom, right? Why haven't we done this, or why haven't we talked about this, or whatever? Because I'm no different today than I was then. I was only in a different environment that I was in. And so the necessity for basic education, both about our province and about our country, to begin at grade 4 or 5 and continue all the way up through school is unbelievable. As a matter of fact, to make this very tangible, and you might have heard me say this in another venue several weeks ago in Calgary, when I was a teacher, the school had moved away from civics. And so it was history and geography and the rest of it. But there was no formal civics program. I went to the principal and said to the principal, may I introduce a course in civics to the classes that I teach? And he said, well, where are you going to get the time? It's going to be very difficult. Well, I said, we'll do it if you agree. And take away no time from the rest of the courses or anything like that. We'll do it on Thursday or Friday afternoon, and we'll get the bus driver to wait an extra half an hour so that we can have this extra class if necessary. So that's what I did. And then the other question was, by other teachers as well, they won't be interested. Even back then, I'm talking about back in late 60s, back then. And I said, you're not serious? Because I said, students and people and human beings, Homo sapiens, are curious people by nature. They're always looking to learn something new. And they'll always be interested. And they said, well, okay. Well, I did not have an absentee in that course for the whole year. Everybody stayed, and they could leave. Everybody stayed, and everybody enjoyed what we were doing. And when they finished that year, they knew that Canada was a federation. They knew that there were really 3 levels of government through the Constitution, right? The federal government, the provincial government, and the municipal governments. The municipal governments were a creature of the province, as opposed to being a federal oriented thing. It was a provincial thing. It was a decentralization of authority as we moved through the Constitution. And when I did that, and then after Christmas began to introduce, after they understood and were tested, by the way, on how well they knew the federal system, I compared it to the American system because it was right here on our same continent. So I have practical experience in implementing that kind of thing within a school in our country, and know how well it can work and function. And people just love to know and go home. Students came to my class and said, I went home and told my parents what we were learning. And they said, but my parents didn't know all of that. They only knew part of it. They didn't know all of that. And I said, well, there you go, right? And so they were so proud of themselves because they knew more about their country than their parents did. So that story, tells a million, right? A million lessons. So when I talk, so in order to understand, the media is one thing, but the media is always an opinion. What you have to do is, like I have before me right here, and I did this deliberately before coming on. These are 3 books, right? And these are books as it relates to the structure of Canada, okay? And one is totally on the Constitution. One is totally on the government as a result of the Constitution. The other one is a modern one by a scholar of the University of New Brunswick, Democracy in Canada, and the disintegration of our institutions, how we're starting to fail. And that's a real great book. And so you have to go back to first principles. You have to go back to those things which were the creation, right? Which were including the Constitution, including the government system, including the budget of the province, including the budget of the municipality, right? Including all those kinds of things in order to understand. And so, but there are basic tools available. Some are available online that you could pick up. Many of them are going to be available through conversing with the teachers or other people as it relates to knowing specifically and factually what the Constitution says, how the government evolved, what the present laws of the province are, and so on. And so, so if I had to say one thing to people today, it is we must go back to some basic learning so that once we have those basic tools and information, then we can begin to engage to decide how we should change or move towards the future.
That's so good. You know, I was in elementary school when you were teaching. I was, my education years began in 1964. And by the time I was grade 5 and 6, I loved geography. Just so you know, I loved it, and I could name all of the provinces, all of the capitals of Canada, all of the states, and all of the state capitals of America. And I could name at grade 7, I could name all of the capitals of the nations of the world. And you learn it by rote, yes, but that was something that gave me a picture into the world around me. And folks, I want to encourage you kids, you young people. You're going to tell me you're not kids, I know, but I want to encourage you. Having this part of your education is invaluable. It'll open the world to you, and sir, I believe that you're right. And it's an interesting thing that you left teaching, something that you sound like you were very good at, and became a constitutional guru within Canadian life for the betterment of our culture. I am grateful that you have done all of these things. Today, our nation is fragmented in spite of a very good Charter of Rights and Freedoms, because we have not learned from our past, and we try to sweep the past under the rug instead of facing it and saying, okay, how do we improve? Not just how do we eliminate the problem, because we try to eliminate poverty by spending more money, but it has not it has not worked very well. How do we now instruct? You're an instructor by nature. How do we instruct the next generations on these matters of stewardship for the betterment of the whole? And it's difficult, because when we do that, it will be for the whole. It won't just be for people who are like us. And that is an important point of democracy.
Right. Absolutely, no question. But 1982 was extremely important, not just because of the charter, but because of what the introduction to the charter was. Whereas this country is founded on the principles of the supremacy of God and the rule of law. So we must, in the first instance, have a moral compass. We must have a moral code. And I think this is where we're going astray right now. Man starts to believe that he can create and dominate everything. Once that begins, then the degradation of your society will begin as well. Unless and until a society adopts natural law, that God is over everything, that God created us, that God creates is involved, and that we are subject to God and through Jesus. Until we believe that as our foundational, and that's why the charter is so important. That's why, by the way, it has been ignored so blatantly, is because it is known to be so important in the deliberation of our society, that they know that if they have to consider God in any of their deliberations, which they're supposed to, you will have a different fabric of society than we have today. I have to remind people that a lot of, like in Newfoundland's educational system came out of the churches. The early churches created all of the educational system in Newfoundland. And so and if you look to the United States, yeah, and many of the universities came out of education, and many of the healthcare facilities came out of education. There is no question. I mean, if you want to get factual about it, which we do, because we talked about education and starting with the foundation of information, there is no question that on this globe, on this planet, in this solar system, the most successful organizational or governance structure to ever exist has been the one that's been based upon the Judeo-Christian foundation. There's no question about that. Most people, when they're challenged on this to try to come up with something better, cannot find it. So Canada has, since 1982, unfortunately, since we put it in the Constitution, it has been ignored. And how ironic is that? The very thing that introduces the Charter of Rights and Freedoms has been ignored. And so back to first principles, not only as it relates to various ideas, but also as it relates to what our governance system is going to be. And it has to start. And then after that, and be an integral part of our system all the way through, and all of our laws. And so when this began to happen in 1985, after the Charter of Rights was introduced and passed, after that happened, and it began in 1985 with a court decision, Supreme Court of Canada decision, based, by the way, upon a judge out of Alberta who had said that the God that was in the Constitution didn't matter anymore, and that it wasn't even a Christian God. Meanwhile, all the people who signed the Constitution in 1982 were Christians. So what else was it? Pray tell, what else was it if it wasn't a Christian God? We didn't even put in Christian God because we didn't think it was necessary.
No, it was a foregone conclusion.
There was a form of self-evident, as is used in the Constitution of the United States, as self-evident. And so many things are that way. And so this is the sad dilemma that we're in, that we're operating now in a situation whereby God is being ignored and placed over there, away from all of the laws that are going to govern our system, including the educational system, and all the rest. So that's where we have to start. We have to start with God. And that's where I begin my talks now, is with God. And without that, we will gradually, over time, by having a strictly secular dominated society, we will gradually fail.
As I listen to you, I am reminded of 2 Chronicles 7:14. And I was just in Ottawa recently for the National Day of Prayer. We were in part of Parliament for a whole day of humbling ourselves. And I believe that we need to return to these first principles before we can start to build again. We have to return to the principle where we have fallen short, where we have erred, where we have been misguided.
Yeah.
And we can't blame it on just our teachers. We can't blame it on our culture. We have to take responsibility ourselves. Absolutely. And so I'm going to ask you, if you're willing, I'm going to ask you to pray that every person who views this, whether they, the other thing is that we think that we don't have to show respect or honor to elected officials that we disagree with. And yet Paul never was not in a culture that even had an election. They had a person who was set in place that never was elected, and they learned to honor those dictators, those people, in a way that literally the world was turned right side up because
That's
of it.
where honor your father and mother comes into it. I mean,
Yes.
the basic Christian moral code comes into it, because mother and father stands for those who are senior to us and
Yeah.
to whom we must respect, even if we don't agree with everything they say.
Correct. Would you pray, sir?
Yes, yes. Dear God, may we today and forthcoming recognize the unbelievable importance of your way, of your Son, of giving us the ability to honor you and to carry out the principles honor that you have bestowed upon us. It is extremely important, Lord, that we recognize you first and always, and that under you we can function as a society and as a political entity that thrives and prospers and allows for people to be respectful of one another, disagree on where we disagree, but forge those agreements, those compromises that are necessary in a human society, so that through our compromise and your spirit, we will therefore become the kind of society that you have placed us here to work towards. In your name, we ask. Amen.
Amen and amen. Folks, it's been a wonderful privilege for me to have Honorable Brian Peckford with us today. Sir, I want to thank you for the clarity of your communication and conviction, and we pray blessing on you and your family. Thank you, and we pray that you have many years of influence. And we didn't talk about this earlier, but you also have a podcast. How can people find you with your podcasts?
They can find me on my blog, which I write on every day. It's,
Okay.
Peckford 42, PECKFORD, the number 4, the number 2, the year I was born, .wordpress.com.
All right. Well, we will have a slide up there, folks, so that you can pause the video and write it down later. But again, Brian, you are a friend. I want to thank you for your time and for the wonderful conversation that we have had of how we bring faith back into our culture. The Lord bless you. And each of you, may you, if you find this a good podcast, would you forward it on to friends? Would you like it, whether you've watched it or you've listened to it on Spotify? Thank you for being a part of our family. The Lord bless you and keep you and make his face to shine upon you and give you his peace. God bless. Bye-bye.
As we conclude today's conversation, remember the Father is always inviting you into more. You belong to a greater story, a family shaped by grace and truth. Thank you for sharing our podcast with your friends, and stay connected with us at cfyc.org. If you'd like to connect with Honourable Brian Peckford, you can email him at brianpeckford@gmail.com. Until next time, may his peace guide you, his voice lead you, and his love root you in all you do.